This is week 7, History 425. We're doing part 2 now of week 7. There's going to be 3 parts altogether this week. It's not that it's longer, it's just that this week I've chosen for different reasons to split it up into 3 parts. It's partly because the third part about Tibet is going to be quite different than the rest, and my preparation was split up. Anyway, let's dive right into it. Skip past slides 1 and 2 and go to slide 3. So we're talking about the beginnings of reform, getting away from the Mao thought-led economy, the Maoist economy, as some people would put it, where the thought of Mao Zedong about how to structure social and economic relations was the most important planning element, where politics led the way. Away from that, all of that, and into first a more standard socialist planning mode that existed before 1957, and eventually China turned toward a more authoritarian capitalist system that we'll be learning about in weeks 8 through 10. But this couldn't all be done at once. The change began slowly and was done in very deliberate stages. At first, there were 3 sets of contenders to argue about different next steps. They were the Cultural Revolution beneficiaries, such as Hua Guofeng, who had survived the arrest of the Gang of Four and their followers, and wished to pursue at least some of Mao's old policies. They were people who were happy about the decline of the Gang of Four because that meant that they would survive. But they were opposed to the other 2 groups that were, you might say, depending on how you look at things, more conservative or more radical. And this, I have to say, is you have to have a little bit of patience with all this. The ideas of left and right in China, trying to think of them in our terms is like being in a hall of mirrors. So you have to keep an open mind about these things. The Cultural Revolution survivors, who were also survivors from the earlier period, and the 2 most prominent ones were Ye Jianying, who was a senior army officer, a marshal in the PLA, and Li Xiannian, who was a senior party official, also a survivor from the earlier period. And Chen Yun wished to return to pre-Great Leap socialist planning. They wished to have the economy dominated by large state-owned enterprises, indeed to have the state lead the economy in as many aspects as possible, using socialist planning as the basis for economic growth rather than any sort of free market ideas. And then there were the reformists, led by Deng Xiaoping. He brought in 2 people we'll talk about more next week, Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang. We'll also talk a little bit about Hu Yaobang in the third part of this week's lecture when we speak about Tibet and the changes that occurred there after the Cultural Revolution was over with and after Mao died. These 2 men had been on the reformist end of the Communist Party for its entire period, or their entire period in it. They were younger men. Zhao Ziyang in particular was younger, about 25 years younger than Deng Xiaoping. Hu Yaobang was not much younger. He was also from Sichuan province, as I recall, same as Deng Xiaoping. But they favored changes to the traditional socialist planning to stimulate production and consumption in ways that were not acceptable at any time previously in the People's Republic. So Hua Guofeng, with him in charge, "I'm at ease," was Mao's supposed quote. Um, Mao's successor, Hua Guofeng, remained in power until 1981, but he lost his mojo after December 1978. He was, in effect, out of power for the last 2 years that he was the chairman of the People's Republic. And he wasn't even called the chairman for the last 2 years, as we'll learn in a few minutes. So why the shilly-shallying around? Why be so coy about all this? And it's partly in order to get people used to change, but partly the great desire on the part of the PRC leadership that has existed for its entire time, and that is to maintain stability in the country. Why is stability such an issue? It's an issue because not many people will say this, and there'd be a lot of disagreement if I were at a conference of China specialists, but I'll tell you from my own experience, just talking to people, many people, and observing things over time, I believe the basic problem with stability in China is that people in the cities who hold the power view the peasantry as a wild animal, a great big wild animal that could get out of control at any time. And the whole problem with stability in China and with changes of governments are that changes of governments have tended in the past, not every single time, but they've tended to come with revolution, to come with a change of dynasty, a loss of the mandate of heaven. I think you've heard some of that stuff before. And that comes when the population becomes upset, in historical terms, upset with the emperor. The emperor has lost the mandate. That means he no longer is demonstrating that he can rule the country and keep it stable. And indeed, many of the problems that have been faced by this present government since 1949 have been connected with whether or not the people are calm, cool, and collected, whether or not the great mass of people are in the mood for trouble. The population has always been viewed as an adversary, in my opinion. Anyway, that's the reason, I think, the basic reason, why it was such an issue to be as careful as possible about making these changes, so that people would not get upset, so they could be kept in the dark to the extent possible, but so that they could also be reassured that some positive change would be taking place. Let's go on to slide 4. So Hua Guofeng, it's a matter of debate, and I guess that this might make an interesting extra credit paper. Could Hua Guofeng have stayed in power in the face of the return of Deng Xiaoping? That's a difficult one. I think it could be argued either way, and I would welcome arguments either way in an extra credit paper. But we can identify some very obvious mistakes that Hua made with the clarity of hindsight. For one thing, Hua supported everything that Mao ever said and did in his official capacity as chairman of the People's Republic and as head of the Central Military Commission, which, by the way, is an office I don't mention often enough in this course. Whoever's head of the Central Military Commission is really the most powerful person in the country, not necessarily somebody who holds some other office. Hua was accused of whatever-ism. Whatever Chairman Mao said is the way we should do things. He also hesitated to implement the rehabilitations that of people who had been disgraced or imprisoned during the Cultural Revolution that were so desired by so many people once Mao was gone and once the Gang of Four was under arrest. And these rehabilitations, even of people who had been heroes of the revolution, but had been very clearly unfairly criticized during the Cultural Revolution, even they were not rehabilitated for years. And people blamed that quite a bit on Hua Guofeng. His targets in his 10-year plan, which was the first and last 10-year plan in the history of the People's Republic, were very broad and very, very ambitious. They reminded people of the Great Leap. That didn't win him any friends. And very importantly, he had some shallow support in the security services because that's where he did some time as a senior official. But he was not in the security services long enough to build up a base of support of people who owed him their livings. In other words, he didn't bring up a lot of people, promote a lot of people, which is one of the primary ways that a leader in the People's Republic builds support amongst subordinates in order to maintain and cultivate and grow his or her own power base. So there was really no support there, and there was absolutely no support for Hua in the military, and not very much in the party. So he was easy pickings for Deng Xiaoping, quite frankly. The leaders in the military, Ye Jianying and Li Xianyan, who are pictured here, decided that it was time for him to go. It had to be done carefully, it had to be done slowly, but that he would go. So let's go on to slide 5. Deng Xiaoping's first reemergence publicly, third time's a charm, you might say, after being disgraced twice, was at the 10th Central Committee, its third plenum, that is its third meeting, the third meeting of the 10th Central Committee. You can see I've, just to review so you understand this whole plenum and Central Committee thing, the 10th Central Committee first met in 1973. There was not another Central Committee until 1978. This third plenum or third meeting was, and the last one, there were only 3 of them for this Central Committee, was in July of 1977. By the way, you may not have noticed it, but our Congress in the United States is also numbered. Their sessions are numbered. There's a new Congress every 2 years. How about that? Same basic thing, except we do it a little bit more on schedule than the Chinese do because we've just had more experience at it. Old civilization, not a new government. What can I say? So Deng reemerged at this plenum. You can see him. I've sort of purposely picked this photo for reasons of symbolism. Deng is hidden in the middle of this crowd of people at this table. He's wearing a dark suit. He's near the middle, off to the left just a little bit. Hua Guofeng is sitting straight down between those 2 gigantic portraits of Mao and himself in a lighter suit. And on Hua's left, stage left, your right, are Ye Jianying and Li Xianyan. I find this symbolic not only because Deng is sort of like he's this little tiny figure in the middle of all these other people, emphasizing, I think, partly the I don't know what to call it. The big leaders tend not to emerge in this in the Politburo or the Central Committee. That is, they're not prominent. Whoever is in charge is prominent, and that's it. Everybody else is low profile. And Deng Xiaoping, of course, he was this very small figure. I think he was only 5'4" tall at the most. But Hua Guofeng in this symbolic photograph is surrounded by people who mean to do him in. That's what I find a little bit amusing about this thing. It was very unusual that this Central Committee agreed to convene the next Central Committee earlier than scheduled. This is a very unusual thing in the history of the Chinese Communist Party, indicating actual agreement and momentum. Usually there's some problem or another that's the rule that delays things. But anyway, Deng Xiaoping was restored to all of his posts, and the Gang of Four members, along with Kang Sheng, who I mentioned previously, were all expelled from the Chinese Communist Party. Let's go on to slide 6. So then there's the 11th CCP Central Committee. Its third meeting, its third plenum. They were coming fast and furious here in 1977 and 78. There was a big difference in this plenum compared to the third plenum over a year previously, 18 months previously, from the previous Central Committee, and that was that now Deng Xiaoping was thoroughly in charge. He wasn't just re-emerged. He wasn't just the comeback kid, so to speak. And the focus went from political campaigns to economic goals. There were no more big portraits of anybody except maybe Mao that were up anywhere. And Hua himself, although he was still formally in office, he was no longer even called the chairman. In the documents that came out of this meeting of the Central Committee, a number of people were rehabilitated, senior leaders, and this was one of the big departures from the time of Hua. No more delays. They were done in a rather measured manner. Each one of the rehabilitations was preceded by a formal investigation. And this is another interesting point about the Chinese Communist Party. They are a real bureaucracy. You think we've got a bureaucracy in Portland City Hall, you think we've got a bureaucracy in the federal government, the IRS, whatever you want to name. They have a bureaucracy. And the party was not about to rehabilitate even the most obvious figures that needed it without a thorough investigation and documentation, interviews with witnesses, gathering of documents, and all that jazz. And so this is one of the other things that slowed it down, even though now was the time to push forward and there was momentum to do so. Chen Yun had been around for many decades. He's pictured here. He started off doing a number of things in the party. His first really prominent role, his most important role, was that he was a very senior official in the Zhongyang Teke, in the Central Committee Special Operations branch. And he was a very key figure in the secret war, underground war in Shanghai in the late 1920s and into the early 1930s. And then later on, he went on to become head of the organization department, which is an extremely prominent position in the party, the head of HR for the party, in other words. During the Yinan period, in the late 1930s and early 40s, he held that position. And then he switched to his specialty, which was economics, and was the prime mover behind the 5-year plans. He ran afoul of Mao Zedong when Mao became dissatisfied with the progress of the 5-year plans. And Chen Yun lost office for quite a while, twice. This was also his, let's see, first, second. This was his second comeback during this period. And he was needed because he was the smartest mind and had the most experience when it came to promoting state planning in the economic, in the large state-owned sector, the big factories, the state-owned oil sector, and everything else, the trade sector, all of the light manufacturing that was being revived during this time. Chen Yun was just the right man to get that moving according to the standards of pre-1957. But later on, which we'll talk about next week, when Deng Xiaoping was ready for more radical reforms of the economy, Chen became his opponent. We'll stop this audio here and go on to slide 7.